In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, American soldiers huddle in foxholes, breath misting in the December darkness. Some write letters home, others talk quietly about Christmas, now just 9 days away. The front has been silent for weeks. This is where exhausted divisions come to rest. At 5:30 in the morning on December 16, 1944, the horizon erupts. 1,900 German artillery pieces open fire simultaneously along an 85-mile front. The ground shakes. Trees explode into splinters. Men who moments ago were dreaming of home are now dying in their foxholes. Through the smoke and falling snow, shapes emerge from the tree line. German infantry first, then armor. Tanks that Allied intelligence said did not exist. Divisions that were supposed to be destroyed months ago. An entire army that should not be there. The largest German offensive since 1940 has begun, and the Americans have no idea what is about to hit them. 6 weeks earlier, in the concrete bunkers of the Wolf's Lair, Adolf Hitler revealed a plan that stunned his generals. Germany was dying. Everyone in the room knew it. In the east, the Soviet summer offensive had destroyed Army Group Center, killing or capturing over 400,000 German soldiers in a matter of weeks. The Red Army now stood at the gates of Warsaw. In the west, the Normandy breakout had liberated France and Belgium, and Allied forces had reached the German border by September. The Luftwaffe had lost air superiority over the Reich itself. Synthetic fuel production had been crippled by relentless strategic bombing. The WOPS was bleeding 150,000 casualties every month. By any rational calculation, the war was lost. But Hitler did not deal in rational calculations. He saw opportunity where his generals saw only catastrophe. The Western Allies had outrun their supply lines after the breakout from Normandy. Montgomery's Operation Market Garden had failed spectacularly at Arnhem. The Allied advance had stalled along a 600-mile front, stretching from Switzerland to the North Sea. American forces in one particular sector were stretched dangerously thin: the Ardennes. Hitler's plan was audacious to the point of madness. 3 German armies would smash through the weakly held American lines in the Ardennes, race for the Meuse River, and capture the vital port of Antwerp. This would sever the British 21st Army Group from American forces to the south, trapping and destroying 25 to 30 Allied divisions. Faced with a second Dunkirk, Britain would be forced to sue for peace. Germany could then turn its full strength against the Soviet Union. The generals who heard this plan were horrified. Field Marshal Gerhard von Rundstedt, the nominal commander of German forces in the West, privately called it a nonsensical operation. Field Marshal Walter Model, who would command Army Group B and bear direct responsibility for the offensive, believed capturing Antwerp was impossible with available forces. He proposed a more limited operation that might actually succeed. Hitler refused to consider alternatives. The offensive would proceed as he envisioned it. The generals were searched before entering the briefing room, their briefcases confiscated. Hitler trusted no one. The operation was codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, to suggest defensive intent and deceive Allied intelligence. In reality, Hitler was assembling the largest German force on the Western Front since D-Day. 3 armies would attack. In the north, the 6th Panzer Army under SS General Josef Dietrich would deliver the main blow. Dietrich was a Nazi loyalist and former Hitler bodyguard with limited formal military education. But his army received the best equipment and the priority in reinforcements. 4 SS Panzer divisions, including the elite 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler and the 12th SS Hitler Jugend, would spearhead the assault with approximately 125,000 troops. In the center, the 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel represented Germany's most capable striking force. Manteuffel was a skilled tactician who successfully lobbied Hitler to modify the attack plan, including moving the assault time from 11 in the morning to 5:30 in the pre-dawn darkness. His 4 panzer divisions and 100,000 troops would target the critical road junctions at Bastogne and St. Vith. In the south, the 7th Army under General Erich Brandenberger would form a defensive shoulder with 4 infantry divisions, protecting the offensive southern flank from American counterattack. In total, Hitler committed over 410,000 troops, 1,400 tanks and assault guns, and 1,900 artillery pieces to the operation. It was everything Germany had left. The buildup was conducted with extraordinary secrecy. All movement occurred at night. Radio silence was absolute. Troops were confined to the forests during daylight hours. Horse-drawn transport replaced motor vehicles where possible to reduce noise and conserve precious fuel. Deception operations suggested defensive preparations rather than offensive intent. For 2 months, the Germans assembled an army in plain sight without the Allies noticing. Across the lines, the Americans saw nothing alarming. Allied intelligence had grown confident, perhaps overconfident, after the victories of summer and fall. They assumed Germany lacked the capability for major offensive operations. Evidence of the buildup was dismissed as defensive repositioning. Reports of unusual rail traffic to the Eifel region were filed and forgotten. Captured documents mentioning Wacht am Rhein were interpreted as references to a defensive plan. The Ardennes sector was considered so quiet that it served 2 purposes. Exhausted divisions recovering from heavy fighting elsewhere were sent there to rest. Green divisions fresh from the United States were sent there to gain experience in a low-threat environment before being committed to active fronts. The result was a dangerously thin line. The 8th Corps under Major General Troy Middleton held 85 miles of front with just 4 divisions. The 106th Infantry Division had arrived only 5 days before the attack, its soldiers still learning the terrain. The 28th Infantry Division had been mauled in the brutal Hurtgen forest fighting and was sent to the Ardennes to recover. The 4th Infantry Division was similarly depleted. The 9th Armored Division was newly arrived and untested. 83,000 Americans faced what was about to become 410,000 Germans. The defenders had roughly 1 soldier for every 50 yards of front. Allied commanders called it a calculated risk. They calculated wrong. On December 15, 1944, German forces moved to their final assembly areas. Across the lines, American soldiers in the Ardennes settled in for what they expected to be a quiet night. Some units were planning Christmas parties. Others were rotating men to rear areas for hot showers and warm meals. Letters home spoke of the war being almost over, of being home by spring. In the frozen forests of the Eifel, 410,000 German soldiers waited in silence. They had received special rations for the offensive. Their tanks had been allocated precious fuel from Germany's dwindling reserves. Their artillery had been pre-registered on American positions identified by weeks of careful observation. The weather forecast called for continued overcast skies and snow. For the Germans, this was essential. Cloud cover would neutralize the Allied air forces that had devastated German formations throughout the summer and fall. As long as the weather held, they would have something approaching a fair fight. At 5:30 in the morning on December 16, the order came. 1,900 guns opened fire. The Ardennes exploded, and Hitler's last gamble began. The first hours were chaos. American soldiers woke to a world of fire and noise. Artillery shells screaming down on positions that had been quiet for weeks. Communications lines were severed within minutes. Forward observation posts went silent. Company commanders could not reach battalion headquarters. Battalion commanders could not reach regiment. Nobody knew what was happening. Through the smoke and falling snow, German infantry emerged from the tree line. They advanced in disciplined waves, exploiting the gaps torn in American defenses by the artillery barrage. Behind them came the armor, Panther tanks, and the massive King Tigers, vehicles that American soldiers in this sector had never seen. The shock was complete. At the Lausanne Gap, a natural corridor through the Ardennes defended by the 14th Cavalry Group, the line collapsed almost immediately. The cavalry unit was a reconnaissance force, equipped and trained for scouting rather than holding ground against a major assault. When elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division poured through the gap, the cavalrymen could do little but fall back or die in place. Many did both. The breakthrough at Losheim opened the door for Kampfgruppe Peiper, the spearhead of 6th Panzer Army. SS Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper was 29 years old, an aggressive commander who had been given the offensive's most critical mission. His battle group of 5,000 troops and over 100 tanks was ordered to race for the Meuse River bridges before the Americans could react. Speed was everything. He was not to stop for anything. Peiper drove his men forward with ruthless determination. On the first day, his column advanced 25 miles, deeper into American territory than any other German formation. American units that stood in his path were brushed aside or destroyed. Those that could not escape were left behind as the panzers rolled west. On December 17, near a crossroads south of the town of Malmedy, Peiper's advance guard encountered a convoy of American vehicles from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. Outgunned and surprised, approximately 150 American soldiers surrendered. They were herded into a field beside the road, while the German column continued west. What happened next would become one of the most infamous atrocities of the Western Front. SS troops opened fire on the prisoners standing in the field. Machine guns cut down men who moments before had surrendered in good faith. Some Americans fell and played dead, lying motionless as German soldiers walked among the bodies, shooting anyone who moved. Between 81 and 84 Americans were murdered. A handful survived by feigning death until the Germans moved on, then escaping through the woods to American lines. Malmedy was not an isolated incident. Peiper's unit killed American prisoners at Hansfeld, at Bulge, at Stavelot. They murdered Belgian civilians suspected of aiding the Americans. Over 350 civilians would die at the hands of the Kampfgruppe before its advance was stopped. The massacre revealed something about the nature of the forces Hitler had unleashed. News of Malmedy spread through American units with remarkable speed. The effect was immediate and lasting. Soldiers who might have considered surrender now knew what it could mean. Resistance stiffened. Quarter became something neither given nor expected when SS units were involved. The atrocity that was meant to terrorize instead hardened American resolve. While Kampfgruppe Peiper raced west, the German offensive was achieving devastating success elsewhere along the front. On the Schnee Eifel, a forested ridge in the center of the American line, the 106th Infantry Division was being surrounded. The division had been in position for only 5 days. Its soldiers were still learning the terrain when the German assault hit them. 2 regiments of the division, the 422nd and 423rd Infantry, occupied exposed positions on the ridge. When German forces enveloped both flanks, the regiments found themselves cut off from supply, reinforcement, or retreat. For 2 days they held, waiting for relief that never came. Ammunition ran low, food ran out, the wounded could not be evacuated. On December 19, approximately 7,000 American soldiers surrendered. It was the largest American capitulation since Bastogne in 1942. 2 entire regiments ceased to exist as fighting units. The disaster revealed how badly the American command had misjudged the threat, placing a Green Division in an exposed position against what turned out to be overwhelming force. But not everyone was caught flat-footed. Major General Troy Middleton, commanding the 8th Corps, recognized almost immediately that this was no local spoiling attack. As reports of German armor and infantry flooded his headquarters, he understood the enemy's intentions. They needed the road networks. And the most critical road junction in the entire sector was a small Belgian town called Bastogne. 7 major roads converged at Bastogne. Whoever held the town controlled movement through the central Ardennes. If the Germans took it, their armor could fan out toward the Meuse. If the Americans held it, German logistics would be strangled. Middleton made the decision that would shape the entire battle. Bastogne must be held at all costs. The problem was finding troops to hold it. Middleton's divisions were already engaged, already being pushed back, already suffering heavy casualties. He needed reinforcements, and he needed them immediately. The answer came from Supreme Headquarters. On the evening of December 17, Eisenhower released the Strategic Reserve. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, resting near Reims after the fighting in Holland, received orders to move immediately. The 101st drew Bastogne. What followed was a race against time that would determine the battle's outcome. The 101st Airborne began its truck march on the night of December 18. The paratroopers had no idea what they were driving into. Many had left so quickly that supply trucks were still being loaded when the convoy departed. Some soldiers arrived at Bastogne without weapons, having been separated from their equipment in the chaos of the hasty departure. The distance from Reims to Bastogne was approximately 100 miles. The roads were clogged with retreating American units, fleeing civilians, and abandoned vehicles. The weather was miserable, the visibility poor, the cold savage. The trucks drove through the night. On the morning of December 19, lead elements of the 101st Airborne arrived at Bastogne. They had beaten the Germans by hours. Just hours. By midday, German forces were approaching the town from multiple directions. By evening, the roads were coming under fire. On December 20, the encirclement was complete. All 7 roads into Bastogne were cut. Approximately 18,000 American soldiers, including the 101st Airborne, elements of the 10th Armored Division, the 9th Armored Division, and various artillery and support units, were surrounded by 54,000 Germans. That same day, the crisis at Supreme Headquarters reached its peak. Eisenhower convened a meeting of senior commanders at Verdun to assess the situation and coordinate the response. The mood was grim. German forces had penetrated 50 miles into Allied lines. Entire divisions had been destroyed or scattered. The scope of the intelligence failure was becoming apparent. Eisenhower refused to despair. He told his commanders that the present situation was to be regarded as one of opportunity and not of disaster. Then he turned to General George Patton, whose Third Army was engaged in offensive operations to the south. How quickly could Patton disengage, pivot his forces 90 degrees, and attack north to relieve Bastogne? Patton's answer stunned the room. December 22. 3 days. Most of those present considered it impossible. Turning an entire army around and launching a major offensive in 72 hours defied every principle of military logistics. But Patton had anticipated the German attack. He had already instructed his staff to prepare contingency plans for exactly this situation. The impossible was merely very difficult. Eisenhower made 2 critical decisions at Verdun. He gave Patton permission to pivot Third Army north, and he transferred command of all American forces north of the German penetration to Field Marshal Montgomery, whose 21st Army Group was positioned to seal the northern shoulder of the Bulge. The decisions were made, the orders were issued, now everything depended on execution. Inside Bastogne, the paratroopers of the 101st dug in and waited. They were surrounded by 3 times their number. They were running low on ammunition, food, and medical supplies. The weather remained overcast, preventing aerial resupply or close air support. Their wounded were dying in aid stations that lacked basic surgical equipment. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, temporarily commanding the division while Major General Maxwell Taylor was in Washington, faced a simple calculation: hold until relieved or die trying. The Germans were about to make him an offer. The siege of Bastogne became the defining episode of the entire battle. Inside the perimeter, 18,000 Americans faced 54,000 Germans in conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. The temperature dropped below 0. Snow accumulated in drifts that buried foxholes and turned roads into treacherous ice paths. Medical supplies were so scarce that surgeons operated by flashlight in cellars, the thunder of artillery overhead drowning out the screams of men being cut open without adequate anesthesia. The defenders were a patchwork force, thrown together by circumstance. The 101st Airborne Division formed the Corps, approximately 11,000 paratroopers who had fought in Normandy and Holland, and now found themselves in another desperate situation. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division had arrived just before the encirclement closed, adding precious tanks and tank destroyers to the defense. Elements of the 9th Armored Division, the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and various artillery units rounded out the garrison. They came from different commands and had never trained together, but they shared a common understanding. The Germans needed Bastogne. They could not be allowed to have it. General McAuliffe organized the defense in a rough circle around the town, positioning his forces to cover the 7 roads that converged at the crossroads. Each road was a potential avenue of attack. Each had to be held. There was no reserve to speak of. Every unit was on the line. If one sector broke, there was nothing to stop the Germans from pouring through. The attacks began almost immediately and continued without respite. German commanders threw infantry and armor at the perimeter from multiple directions, probing for weakness, searching for the point where the American line would crack. The paratroopers held. They held in foxholes scraped from frozen ground. They held in ruined buildings on the outskirts of town. They held at roadblocks improvised from wrecked vehicles and fallen trees. Ammunition ran low. Men counted their rifle rounds and made each shot count. Artillery crews rationed shells, knowing that resupply was impossible as long as the weather kept Allied aircraft grounded. On December 21, the clouds broke briefly, and a handful of transport aircraft managed to drop supplies into the perimeter. It was not enough. Medical supplies remained critical. Wounded men who might have been saved died for lack of plasma and surgical equipment. The cold claimed its own victims, frostbite cases mounted by the hour. Men who fell asleep in their foxholes sometimes did not wake up. Then, on December 22, German officers approached the American lines under a white flag. They carried a formal ultimatum addressed to the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne. The document was written in English and German, typed on fine paper, delivered with the formality of a diplomatic note. Its message was blunt. German forces had surrounded Bastogne. The situation was hopeless. Further resistance would only result in the annihilation of the garrison. The American commander was given 2 hours to consider honorable surrender. If the offer was refused, German artillery and air forces would destroy the town. The German officers waited while the message was carried to McAuliffe's headquarters. The general read the ultimatum, and his first reaction was reportedly unprintable. When his staff asked for a formal response to send back, McAuliffe was stumped. What could he say to such a demand? Colonel Harry Kennard, the division operations officer, suggested that McAuliffe's initial reaction was perfect. The one-word reply became one of the most famous responses in military history. Nuts. The message was typed on a single sheet of paper and handed to Colonel Joseph Harper, who carried it back to the waiting German officers. The senior German read the response with visible confusion. He asked whether the reply was negative or affirmative. Harper answered without hesitation. The reply is decidedly not affirmative. If you do not understand what nuts means, in plain English, it is the same as go to hell. And I will tell you something else. If you continue to attack, we will kill every goddamn German that tries to break into this city. The German officers departed. The surrender demand had been refused. Inside Bastogne, word of McAuliffe's response spread rapidly through the garrison. Men who had spent days fighting in freezing cold, short on ammunition and food, surrounded by enemies who outnumbered them 3 to 1, suddenly found themselves laughing. The single word captured something essential about American defiance. They would not quit. They would not surrender. They would hold or die. The German response to the rejection was immediate. Artillery bombardment intensified. Infantry attacks increased in frequency and ferocity. The ring around Bastogne tightened, but the town did not fall. Then on December 23, something changed. The clouds that had shrouded the Ardennes since the offensive began finally parted. For the first time in a week, the skies over Belgium were clear. American commanders had been praying for this moment. General Patton had famously asked his chaplain to compose a prayer for good weather and distributed it to his entire command. When the skies cleared, Patton called the chaplain and told him it was a damn fine prayer. The transformation was immediate and devastating. Over 1,000 Allied aircraft sortied on December 23. C-47 transports roared over Bastogne and dropped desperately needed supplies into the perimeter. Medical equipment, ammunition, food, and clothing drifted down under white parachutes. Men who had been rationing rifle rounds suddenly had ammunition to spare. Surgeons received plasma and bandages. The siege was far from over, but the garrison could now fight. While the transport supplied Bastogne, fighter bombers went hunting across the entire Bulge. German columns that had advanced under the protection of cloud cover were suddenly exposed. Tanks caught in the open were destroyed by rockets and bombs. Supply convoys were strafed on roads that offered no cover. The fuel that the German offensive desperately needed burned in columns of black smoke visible for miles. From this moment forward, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Hitler had gambled on bad weather, lasting long enough for his forces to reach the Meuse. The weather had betrayed him. But the Germans were not finished with Bastogne. On Christmas Eve, German commanders massed their forces for a final decisive assault. If they could take the town before Patton's relief force arrived, the road junction would be theirs. The attack came on Christmas Day. At dawn on December 25, German armor and infantry struck the perimeter from the northwest, near the village of Schaus. The assault was the strongest the garrison had faced. Tanks broke through the outer defenses and penetrated into the American position. For hours, the fighting raged at close quarters. This was the closest Bastogne came to falling. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Chapulis led the counterattack with his 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment. 4 tank destroyers that had been held in reserve rumbled forward to engage the German armor. The fighting was desperate and confused, men firing at shapes in the swirling snow, tanks dueling at ranges where misses were impossible. By afternoon, the German attack had been stopped. The penetration was sealed, the line held. The Christmas assault was the last major German effort against Bastogne. They had thrown everything they had at the town and failed to take it. Now all they could do was try to hold their positions while Patton's Third Army ground toward them from the south. The relief force had covered incredible distance in impossible time. Patton had turned his entire army 90 degrees and launched a major offensive in approximately 72 hours, a feat of staff work and logistics that military historians still study. The 4th Armored Division led the advance, fighting through German resistance mile by mile, village by village, crossroads by crossroads. On December 26, Lieutenant Colonel Crichton Abrams led his 37th Tank Battalion toward the village of Ardennes, the last obstacle before Bastogne. Abrams was an aggressive commander who would later become Army Chief of Staff. The main battle tank that bears his name, the M1 Abrams, honors his service. On this day, he was simply a tank battalion commander with a mission. The fighting at Ardennes was sharp and bloody. German defenders contested every yard, but by late afternoon, Abrams' tanks had broken through. At 4:45 in the afternoon, lead elements of the 4th Armored Division made contact with the Bastogne garrison. The siege was over. 7 days of encirclement, constant attack, bitter cold, and dwindling supplies had not broken the defenders. McAuliffe's one-word reply had entered history. The men who held Bastogne had become legends, but the Battle of the Bulge was far from over. The Germans still held a 50-mile salient driven into Allied lines. Now that salient would have to be eliminated. While the defenders of Bastogne celebrated their relief, the spearhead of the German offensive was dying in the snow 60 miles to the north. Kampfgruppe Peiper, the armored fist that had punched deepest into American lines, had run out of fuel and out of options. Peiper's battle group had reached its farthest point on December 19 near the village of Stoumont. Just miles away sat one of the largest American fuel dumps in the theater, over 3 million gallons that could have sustained the German advance for weeks. But determined, American defenders held the approaches long enough for the fuel to be evacuated. The prize that could have transformed the offensive slipped through German fingers by the narrowest of margins. Without captured fuel, Peiper's tanks began to stop. One by one, the Panthers and King Tigers that had terrorized American forces ground to a halt with empty tanks. German logistics, already strained beyond breaking, could not push supplies forward fast enough to keep the spearhead moving. The armored column that had advanced 25 miles on the first day could no longer advance at all. American forces closed in from all sides. Artillery pounded German positions. Infantry infiltrated through the forests. The hunters had become the hunted. By December 23, Peiper's situation was hopeless. His vehicles were immobilized. His ammunition was running low. His men were exhausted and frozen. Relief was not coming. On December 24, Peiper made the decision that symbolized the failure of Hitler's entire gamble. He ordered his remaining troops to abandon their vehicles and escape on foot. Approximately 800 men of the original 5,000 began walking east through the frozen forests, leaving behind every tank, every half-track, every artillery piece, every truck. The most powerful armored battle group in the offensive ended its campaign by walking home. American forces moving into the abandoned positions found King Tiger tanks with empty fuel tanks, the most powerful armored vehicles in the world, rendered useless for lack of gasoline. The discovery captured something essential about the offensive. Germany had bet everything on a campaign it could not logistically sustain. The gamble had been doomed from the moment it began. But Hitler refused to accept defeat, even as his commanders reported the offensive's failure, even as his forces began retreating under relentless Allied pressure. He demanded one more roll of the dice. On New Year's Day, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, a surprise attack on Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. Over 850 German aircraft participated in the strike, the largest German air operation since the Battle of Britain. The pilots caught many Allied air bases in the midst of New Year's celebrations. The initial results were impressive. Approximately 300 Allied aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Multiple airfields were damaged. Several Allied pilots were killed before they could reach their planes. But the cost was catastrophic. Over 300 German aircraft were shot down by anti-aircraft fire or Allied fighters scrambled to intercept. 213 pilots were killed or listed as missing. 19 irreplaceable unit commanders died in a single day. 108 pilots were captured. The Luftwaffe traded experienced aviators who could not be replaced for aircraft the Allies could easily rebuild. Operation Bodenplatte was the last gasp of German air power in the West. The pilots and planes expended on New Year's Day would never threaten Allied operations again. The sky belonged permanently to the Allies. On the ground, the Bulge was collapsing. On January 3, 1945, the Allied counteroffensive began in earnest. First Army attacked from the north. Third Army continued pushing from the south. The goal was to cut off the German salient at its base and trap the forces still inside. German commanders recognized the danger and began withdrawing, but Hitler's orders complicated every decision. The Führer insisted on holding ground game, refusing to authorize retreat until positions became untenable, then refusing again at the next line. The fighting during the counteroffensive was brutal. The same frozen terrain that had hindered the American defense now hindered the German retreat. Sub-zero temperatures claimed victims on both sides. Frostbite cases numbered in the thousands. Men died of exposure in foxholes they were too weak to leave. The Ardennes in January 1945 was a frozen hell, where survival itself was an achievement. German resistance stiffened as the salient contracted. Some units fought well during the withdrawal, conducting organized delaying actions that cost the Allies time and casualties. Others collapsed under the pressure, their cohesion shattered by weeks of combat and retreat. The Wehrmacht that had launched the offensive with such confidence was disintegrating before American eyes. On January 13, Allied forces linked up within the Bulge, squeezing the German salient from both sides. On January 16, soldiers from 1st Army and 3rd Army met at the town of Houffalize. The Bulge had been cut in half. German forces, still inside, scrambled to escape before the trap closed completely. On January 25, American forces recaptured St. Vith. the road junction that had held for 5 critical days at the offensive's start before finally falling. The recapture marked the official end of the Battle of the Bulge. German forces had been pushed back to their starting positions. 6 weeks of fighting had gained them nothing. The cost was staggering. American casualties totaled approximately 89,000. 19,000 were killed, 47,000 were wounded. 23,000 were captured or missing. It remains the bloodiest battle in the history of the United States Army. More Americans died in the Ardennes in 6 weeks than died in the entire Revolutionary War. More were wounded than in any other single campaign the nation had ever fought. German casualties were equally devastating, approximately 100,000 by most estimates. Between 12 and 17,000 were killed. 38 to 50,000 were wounded. 30,000 were captured. The numbers alone told only part of the story. Germany lost over 800 tanks and assault guns that its factories could not replace. Over 1,000 aircraft were destroyed. 6,000 vehicles were abandoned or destroyed in the retreat. Irreplaceable fuel reserves that might have sustained the defense of Germany itself had been consumed in an offensive that achieved nothing. Beyond the statistics lay the human dimension of the catastrophe: frozen bodies in foxholes, prisoners murdered at crossroads, civilians caught in the crossfire of armies that fought through their villages and farms. Belgian death toll from the battle reached between 2,500 and 3,000 civilians. The Ardennes cemeteries hold over 23,000 American dead, their white crosses marching in silent rows across fields that were once battlegrounds. The battle produced heroes whose names deserved remembrance. Lieutenant Lyle Buch and his 18-man intelligence and reconnaissance platoon held a position at Lanzerath for over 18 hours against an entire German regiment, inflicting over 400 casualties and delaying Kampfgruppe Peiper by a full day. Their stand went unrecognized for decades. When the Army finally investigated, the platoon was found to be one of the most decorated small units in its history. Thousands of others fought with equal courage in actions that were never recorded. Squad leaders who held their men together when everything was falling apart. Medics who crawled through fire to reach the wounded. Tank crews who engaged enemy armor at point-blank range. Artillery forward observers who called fire on their own positions rather than let them be overrun. The battle was won by ordinary men who found within themselves the capacity for extraordinary action. The strategic verdict was clear and damning. Hitler had gambled Germany's last strategic reserves on an offensive that never had a realistic chance of achieving its objectives. The forces expended in the Ardennes could not defend the Rhine when Allied armies crossed in March. They could not slow the Soviet offensive that tore through Poland in January. They could not protect Berlin from the final assault. Most historians believe the Battle of the Bulge shortened the war by consuming German forces that might have prolonged resistance by weeks or months. Hitler had hoped to split the Western Allies and force a negotiated peace. Instead, he accelerated his own destruction. The gamble had failed in every dimension. Germany would fight on for another 4 months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Wehrmacht had shot its bolt in the Ardennes. There would be no recovery. There would be no miracle. There would only be the long, bloody road to unconditional surrender. Hitler had bet everything on one roll of the dice. The dice had come up wrong, and now Germany would pay the price. The Battle of the Bulge broke the back of the German army in the West. The reserves Hitler committed to the Ardennes could not defend the Rhine when Eisenhower's forces crossed in March. They could not slow the Red Army's advance through Poland. They could not save Berlin. Within 5 months of the offensive's failure, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The last gamble had become the final defeat. For the United States, the battle became something more than a military victory. It became proof that American soldiers could absorb a devastating blow and strike back. Bastogne entered the national mythology. McAuliffe's single-word reply became legend. The 19,000 who died in the frozen Ardennes became symbols of sacrifice in the cause of liberation. Today, white crosses mark their graves in the fields where they fell. The artillery is silent. The snow falls as it did in December 1944. But the men who held those frozen lines ensured that Hitler's last gamble would also be his last.